10 seconds. And mark. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have ignition.
Liftoff confirmed. Antares and the SS Gene Cernan now bound for the International Space Station.
The Cygnus cargo spacecraft now en route to the space station following this morning's successful launch from NASA's Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia at 7:19 a.m. I'm Tabitha Thompson with NASA's Office of Communications. I have with me Dan Hartman with the International Space Station Program, Frank DeMauro, who is Vice President and General Manager of Orbital ATK Advanced Programs Division, and in the center, Kurt Eberly, who is the Antares Deputy Program Manager with Orbital ATK. We're going to start with Dan.
Thank you, Tabitha. Beautiful morning, beautiful launch. It was great to put a rumble in the air here and get Cygnus off the ground, and it's on its way to the International Space Station. It was just a miraculous launch and a flawless countdown, and these gentlemen will talk a lot more about that, but I would like to congratulate the Orbital ATK team and all the folks here at the center that put this show on this morning for everybody. Again, it's just great to have that spacecraft heading toward the International Space Station. The onboard crew was able to watch the launch live. We were able to hook that up through the Mission Control Center in Houston, and so they enjoyed the show. Presently, they're fully trained. The spacecraft will arrive on Tuesday morning at about 3:50 a.m. Houston time, where Apollo will use the SSRMS and berth it and bring it into our Node 1 Nadir location. Crew's really rested, ready to go. They'll have a busy time in front of them for the next 3 weeks as we unpack all the cargo, about 7,400 pounds of cargo, and then turn that back around and repack it full of disposable items, which is very key to keeping the flexibility and the operations on board the International Space Station at full tilt. And plan to keep it there till December 3rd, when then we'll do a maneuver and do a test with the Cygnus vehicle, and then finally on its release on December 4th. And so, again, it was a great mission. Start today. We're anxious to get Cygnus on board the International Space Station, and again, just a hearty congratulations to the team that pulled it off this morning.
And
okay, thank you, Dan. I'm really excited to be here after a really good launch today. But first, I'd like to point out and rewind to yesterday after we aborted, unfortunately, for a aircraft in the hazard area. We initiated our abort processing and detanked the rocket, and it was a good exercise of what we've been planning for, which is the ability to count down very deep into the count, really up to L0, and then be able to turn around and launch again the next day. So I'd really like to thank our spaceport operator, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, which is run by Virginia Space. They just scrambled yesterday. They brought in tankers of liquid oxygen to top up the storage tank because we always boil off a little bit when we do an attempt. They repressurized the nitrogen. And then we had our Antares team come in, the second shift crew. They safed the vehicle after detanking it. There's a few configuration items we have to go back through, put desiccant plugs back into the tanks and so on, and get ready for the next attempt, and that was all done very well. So really thanks to everybody for all the support and enabling us to demonstrate that rapid recycle for the next day. Compared to yesterday, today was very boring, and that's how we like it. The more boring, the better. Can't be boring enough. So we just stepped right down through the countdown. Really had very few issues. The only issue we had was one of the main engines, we chill down the engine with liquid oxygen. As soon as we load liquid oxygen into the tank, it starts trickling down into the engine pumps and starting to chill them down. And we had one that initially the preburner gets loaded with liquid oxygen, and then it warms up, and that liquid oxygen boils off and escapes. And that just didn't happen fast enough. We initiated, you may have heard steps called Tango 1 that the launch conductor was calling it. That was to initiate a special nitrogen purge that we added to try to accelerate that process. And it was just taking a little longer today than anticipated. So actually we decided we were going to push to the end of the window. Anyway, that turned out fortuitous. It gave the range some more time to clear out some boats that were trending towards the hazard area. And then there was also a report of one aircraft south of the hazard area that didn't end up actually making it far enough into the hazard area. So along that lines, just for everyone who's listening, would just like to encourage everyone to just listen to the range authorities, pay attention to the notice to airmen, the notice to mariners that they put out weeks in advance of each launch, and ask for everyone's cooperation to just to follow the direction of the range crew and the troopers that keep everybody safe and out of the hazard area, and we'll be able to put off a good launch. Okay, and then we launched, and the first stage worked very well, very little steering commands, so it was right on the money. We then transitioned the telemetry down to Bermuda. We ignited the second stage. That all looked really good. Overall performance was a little high, which is really good. We try to be conservative in our estimates. So, we were targeting about 190 by 290 degrees, 190 kilometers by 290 kilometers, and we ended up at 200 by 333 kilometers. And that's inclined right on the money at 51.636 degrees. And so looking at the statistics, that's about 1.5 sigma high when we do our Monte Carlo analyses on the orbit trajectory. So that all looked really good. And then the other parameter we target is the right ascension of ascending node of the orbit to make sure that we're aligned with the ISS orbit, and that was within 1 sigma. So overall looked like a really good flight, and very exciting, very happy. And Frank, it's over to you for the rest of the mission.
Well, Kurt, thank you. Thanks to you and the great Antares team for a fantastic launch this morning. It was beautiful to see the rocket lift off the pad. The spacecraft is in great shape. Antares put us in a great orbit, as he described. We did some initial checkout of the spacecraft, and everything looks great on the vehicle. The propulsion system is working as expected. The attitude control system's keeping the spacecraft pointing in the right direction. And the big event that we do early on is deploy the solar arrays, and those deployed exactly as we like them. And that enabled us to point the vehicle with the solar arrays pointing towards the sun to keep the batteries charged. They're charging now, and we're going to do some additional checkout of the rendezvous sensors. That'll happen over the next few hours, but the initial data all looks great. Inside the cargo module, the pressure looks right where we wanted it. The powered payloads are drawing current just like we expect, so that's exciting. So it looks like the science is in good shape inside the module. What we'll do now is start our phasing and orbit raising to get to the ISS on Tuesday morning. The first big burn that we'll conduct will be around noon Eastern time today. There'll be several of those burns over the next day, a little more than a day and a half. We will arrive at a particular point in space that we call the Joint Targeting Reference Point early in the morning on Tuesday, and we'll slowly make our way towards the ISS Tuesday morning. And as Dan talked about, we expect to be grappled by the robotic arm operated by the crew at 4:50 Eastern Standard Time Tuesday morning. So a nice early morning for the team, but they're all excited. I was talking to the mission operations team. They have been excited about the mission. Yesterday was sort of a little bit of a dry run, so that worked out okay. They got another good night's sleep, and they're ready to go. This will be the fastest that we'll go from launch to rendezvousing with the space station. It's always been in our plan to do this. This particular time, we actually can exercise that the opportunity to do that. So we're excited to demonstrate that as well. So once we're grappled, we'll get berthed. We'll be on the station for a few weeks, as Dan described, and we'll be ready to depart on the 3rd and the 4th from the ISS. So we have a busy couple of days ahead of us on the Cygnus side, but given the great work by the Antares team and the Wallops team and the Mars team in Virginia Space, we're in a great position to do that. The one thing I will add, as most or all of you probably know, we did name the spacecraft after Gene Cernan. This is the SS Gene Cernan. We did get a great note from the Cernan family this morning after the launch. They were able to watch, really expressing their appreciation for naming the spacecraft after Mr. Cernan. So for someone of his stature in the space industry, it was certainly our honor to do so, and it was great to get that note from them. So with that, the Cygnus team will be busy for the next day and a half, and we're looking forward to getting to Dan's station on Tuesday morning.
Thank you, Frank. If you have a question in the room, please raise your hand, identify yourself and your outlet, and let us know who you're directing your question to, whether it's Dan, Kurt, or Frank. And please wait for the microphone to reach you. We do have a question up front from Ken. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll start with Jason, then we'll come to Ken.
Sorry, Ken. Jason Ryan for Spaceflight Insider. Half jokingly, is NASA or Orbital ATK considering investing in surface-to-air missiles or maybe 50 caliber machine guns to keep the boats out of the way? But all joking aside, what kind of penalty do these folks who stray into the exclusion zone, what can they expect to see if they do this in the future? Because we've seen this quite a lot. Thank you.
Sure. It's not a joking matter, right? I mean, it's trying to keep the public, safe from these hazardous operations. As far as penalties, I'm going to let the FAA work through that. I know our NASA team here at Wallops is working with the FAA already, and I imagine a little bit more stringent procedures or notifications that will go out to the folks that need to be informed of what they're getting ready to go do, or what space they're entering. And I would expect to see additional measures in place for the May launch of the next orbital spacecraft.
We'll come to Ken in the front.
Hi, thank you. Ken Kramer, Universe Today, Northeast Astronomy Forum. For Kurt, you mentioned the slight overperformance of the second stage. I think this happened last year also, and I was wondering how this overperformance compared to the last one and the lessons learned from last year. Did you apply them? Was it the same, or was it another overperformance beyond that? And for Dan, any update on one-year cruise? Thanks.
Well, we last fall's OA-5 launch was the first of the Castor 30 XL, and we have a process where we take the static fire results. So we took, to qualify a solid rocket motor, we take the solid rocket motor, and if it's an upper stage motor, we fire it in a large vacuum chamber. Basically, Arnold Engineering Development Center, it's run by the Air Force, allows us to do that. And we measure the total impulse out of the engine, and then we have some corrections that we do to translate that into flight performance, and that's our propulsion model that we then do our simulations on and plan the flight with. The flight last fall was a little higher than we had expected, so we did adjust the model. It looks like we got from what our GNC guys were able to see real time, they think it's probably, we got another result that was very close to OA-5. We had kind of hedged our bets on the model coming into OA-8 to be a little conservative. We like to be a little conservative, to not overpromise, and to also make sure that we, achieve an orbit, even if there's an anomaly. So we try to err on the high side. There's a big difference between making an orbit and not making an orbit versus, a little difference on the high side is kind of immaterial, since Cygnus has such a capable propulsion system. So that's how we do the mission design, to be more conservative and protect against anomalies. And so I think we will make an update to the model for next time, but we will continue to err on the conservative side. Yep.
And on the one-year crew, there is no doubt our human research program, they have a strong desire to fly additional one-year crew members. And so our goal is to try to meet that. I don't see that happening as long as we're still flying on the Soyuz and doing our crew members' flights on those vehicles. But once we step into commercial crew and get a good cadence and a regular basis going there, I think you'll see one-year crew members come back into play.
Once again, if you have a question in the room, please raise your hand. Wait for the microphone to get to you.
John Brett Schneider, Federal Times and Defense News. What is the range distance that you want boats and aircraft to stay away. Most of us don't have access to notices to airmen and notices to seamen. So how far away do you want them?
You guys know, I'd have to get back to you on that, or we could, certainly have, we get information to Tabitha. I mean, the local range people and the KSC range people, those are the folks that put all that practice into place, and I'm just not aware of the actuals.
Yeah, I don't have the exact distances. I know that the range, roughly, I think it's 10 days to 2 weeks out, they post the notice to airmen and notice to mariners. Those get posted and issued to the FAA and to maritime organizations, and I think they're available via Wallops. So all the commercial operators certainly are aware of all that, and there's no inability to find those notices. I think all the pilots know where to find them. We just, and then on folks on the ground, there's roadblocks that set up, and the troopers are blocking off various roads. So we just ask that everybody, listen to the directions that you're given and not try to, get the hero shot with your long-range camera and go around a roadblock, or be clever and traipse through the woods and enter the hazard area, or take your boat into the back bay, and because you'll end up scrubbing it for everybody, and that's no fun for anyone, and it costs everyone additional money. So that's what we ask, is just follow the directions and the guidance from the authorities. Appreciate that.
You also have a Coast Guard station here. What's the possibility of bringing in additional Coast Guard assets, whether it be surface craft or aircraft, just to help out, to scare away,
Sure.
The intruders?
In fact, we had that very discussion this morning. That's kind of why I mentioned I assume there's some additional measures going to be put in place in May. So I just need to let that team that's working this go work the problem and come up with solutions, and I bet they'll be put into execution on for the next launch out of Wallops.
We'll go now to a couple of questions from Ask NASA. Taking questions via social media.
This first question comes from a Space.com reporter who's asking, I was wondering if there are any Thanksgiving food items or Christmas gifts on Cygnus.
I'm not aware of any specifics, but it is customary that we fly Thanksgiving food items up to the International Space Station. So I don't know exactly what we flew, but I bet there's those types of food groups on this flight. And as far as Christmas gifts, a lot of the families do send Christmas presents up to their, they're given a certain allocation for any given mission, and typically around the holidays, they make use of that with some gifts.
Wonderful. Next question here comes from Katrina on Twitter, who asks, curious what happens to the Antares second stage after Cygnus is deployed. Does it return to burn up?
Yeah, it does. It's in the same orbit as Cygnus, so that orbit parameter that I read out there, 200 by 333, that's not too far outside the atmosphere. So that orbit will not last too long, probably upwards of 3 weeks to a month. Things that affect how long you stay in orbit have to do with whether you're stable or not, and how heavy you are, and your ballistic coefficient, and so on. And then also the atmosphere is not always the same height, and it varies in height in accordance with a number of things. So over time it will re-enter the atmosphere and burn up. So it's not designed to make it through the atmosphere, so it will not survive.
All right. Another question here comes from 4th and 5th grade math and science students in the Bronx, who ask, what are the orbital maneuvering capabilities of the Cygnus SS Gene Cernan?
Let's see, orbital maneuver capability. So the spacecraft is designed to be able to rotate, translate, meaning moving back and forth or sideways, flip over if it needs to. It's what we call a 6 degree of freedom spacecraft. So we have 32 thrusters mounted around the spacecraft in various places, and depending on which thrusters you fire and for how long, you can move the spacecraft pretty much any which way it needs to. We also have one large engine on it. Then that's the engine that we use to raise the orbit. So we'll be using that engine from now through early Tuesday morning, and then when we get closer, we'll only use the smaller engines. But between the engines we have, their locations, the fuel we have on board, Cygnus can pretty much move in any which way.
One more question from NASA Social.
Sure. This comes from Philip, who asks, does Antares use one engine with two nozzles similar to an Atlas V with the RD-180, or is it two separate engines?
It is two separate engines. Each engine has its own turbo pump and is considered its own unit, which is different from the RD-180, which has a single turbo pump that feeds two thrust chambers.
Once again, if you have a question in the room, please raise your hand.
Quick question for Kurt. With that extra oomph that the Antares seems to have since you guys have put those RD-181s in it, can you guys tell us a little bit about what, is that starting to guide how Orbital ATK is thinking about using the rocket? Because now it's like, okay, we got a little more performance that it's capable of delivering. Can you maybe give us a preview of what we might be able to expect in the future given this? Thank you.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, you know, we try to be conservative and make sure we can live up to our contractual obligations. Between Antares and Cygnus, we have really an integrated mission design, and we have margin to make sure that we're able to carry the cargo that we've contracted for. I think we are in a good place now. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be adjusting our models, and when we do that, we'll be able to bank a little bit more margin. How we use that margin, we're talking to Cygnus and we're talking to NASA about how we might be able to use that to everyone's benefit. In addition, next year we are looking to possibly add some secondaries, some small educational satellites in conjunction with Virginia Space. There's a program called ThinSat. If you go to the Virginia Space website, you can read about the ThinSat program. These are very small satellites that would ride on the second stage and not stay in orbit for too long, but be really serve an educational purpose for schools around the Commonwealth and some other states. So we're really excited about that. This kind of margin would enable those kinds of secondary missions to be possible too. But you know, we're also interested in just making that available to Cygnus and seeing how that can improve the overall mission.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Frank and Dan. With that, we'll conclude today. Just a reminder that Cygnus will rendezvous with the space station on Tuesday. Astronauts on board will use the robotic arm to capture the spacecraft about 4:50 a.m. Eastern Time. Live coverage starts on NASA television at 3:15. Thank you.